Welcome to Bounce Back Stronger, the podcast that explores ways to find peace and purpose no matter what happens. Today's guest is memoir and fiction author Rita Zoey Chin. A little bit about Zoe. Zoe is the acclaimed author of the widely praised memoir Let the Tornado Come, described by the Huffington Post as a euphoric ode to the human spirit. The book details how she healed from the effects of a traumatic childhood, in part because of a spirited horse named Claret. Zoe also is the author of the novel The Strange Inheritance of Leah Fern, called a work of literary excellence by the Southern Literary Review and an imaginative debut by the New York Times. Her writing has appeared in renowned publications such as the Boston Globe, Marie Claire, and in Norton's anthology Flash Fiction America. Besides her literary accomplishments, Zoe lives in Massachusetts, where she teaches creative writing, creates beautiful amulets in her metalsmithing studio, and pets all the dogs. Welcome to Bounce Back Stronger, Zoe. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Donna. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I started off talking to Zoe with this book, and I showed her all the sticky notes. I just love this book so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe let's just start right off with the story. So it starts off about you running away, and maybe just take a moment to discuss why you started running away at age 11.
Yeah, sure. My parents were very troubled individuals, and I guess that's me being euphemistic. I don't know why I'm being that way. I lived in a very violent household. There was a lot of violence, a lot of police visits, a lot of drugs, and I was often the victim of a lot of the violence. So I started running away.
And in some ways, you were the only one, right? Sometimes they made a decision to pick you rather than the others at times.
Yeah, so I have a younger sister and she was spared. My father never hit her. She almost died when she was 14 months old and was in the hospital for some time, and they didn't know if she would make it. And there was something about that fragility or vulnerability that she had that I don't know, it's kind of fascinating if you think about it, but he was able to refrain from ever harming her, but not me. Which, as
Yeah.
a child, you think, well, wow, I must really be defective
Hmm.
if he only hits me.
And there's a really touching part towards the end of the book where you show that she's impacted too, that even though she was spared, she was kind of still there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, survivor's guilt is real. And I think that because I ran away, and by the time I was 13, I never lived at home again. I was either on the streets or institutionalized. And so, for better or worse, I got away. She didn't have that. So even though she wasn't physically abused by my father, they were still the people that they were, and she was not spared other kinds of abuse. So yeah, she had to live there, and she didn't have the escape. And I do think that running away, even though it was pretty treacherous journey, I do think it saved my life.
Yeah, you ran to something, you believe there was something better out there for you.
Yeah, I believe that I've been able to move toward healing maybe more easily than I might have if I hadn't stayed there and internalized it more. But I got away, and that act of running, that act of saying no, it's not me, it's you, and rejecting it so that I didn't internalize it and perpetuate the cycle. So I think running away broke the cycle.
That's a really important point because as victims of abuse, there's an opportunity to continue it, and it's hard not to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about the panic attacks that showed up later in your life, and maybe how did they start and how you thought about them, and maybe just a little bit about that part of the journey, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, sure. So, as we were just talking about kind of healing or coming out of that and being, I guess, well adjusted, for lack of a better phrase, enough to go eventually to college and then go to grad school. And I was able to make a life for myself. Started teaching. I met my then husband, who was just a lovely man and very, very sweet and yeah, safe. I think
Mm-hmm.
we made a life. We got married. We moved here from Maryland to Massachusetts, and I had suddenly this life that I had always dreamed about. I had a house and two dogs. Let's not forget.
No, don't forget the
Most
dogs.
importantly, two dogs. And yeah, and it was a great life. So I was stunned when one day I was sitting at my desk and this like strange feeling like came over me. I immediately panicked. I didn't know this what was happening at the time, but I panicked, but I didn't know I was panicking. And my heart started pounding, and I was like, "Why is my heart beating this fast? Like I'm having a heart attack!" And I grabbed the phone and I called 911, and they came,
Yeah.
and I said, "There's something wrong with my heart, definitely." They examined me, they checked my pulse. They're like, "Yeah, it's fast, but you don't have any arrhythmia or anything weird like that." And then they like casually mentioned panic, and I was like, "Oh no, 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 it's definitely not that." And it was that, and
Yeah.
that just set off a chain of panic attacks that just continued to build in intensity and ultimately became pretty immobilizing.
And it's so relevant because I work a bit in mental health around some of the work here I'm doing, and it's such a big thing now. Panic attacks in general and anxiety. It's just grown, since the pandemic in particular. And one of the things I really loved you said is, what can panic teach me? What was the panic trying to teach you, you think?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, it's interesting. My answer will probably always change, right?
Because it doesn't really go away.
Well, it's also, I think, too, the more distance you have from things, a lot of times, the more
Mhm.
clarity you get, or the more you examine yourself or really
Mm.
engage with that. I think you just, yeah, you can see, oh, so that wasn't actually the first panic attack I had. I had other panic attacks, but didn't know they were panic attacks. I thought, oh, I had low blood sugar, or oh, you know what I mean? So I think,
Mhm.
what did it teach me? I think that at the time, it was an opportunity to heal some really deep trauma. I didn't know. I just thought, oh, well, I ran away and yeah, all these terrible things happened to me, but look, I have a great life. And I thought that I could just escape it, I guess. I didn't really
Mhm.
think a lot about it. And what panic kind of forced me to do was to look at it and to say, hang on a second, you have a lot of trauma. And when I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I was like, oh, and my therapist at the time, and he was the last therapist I was going to try. I was about to give up. I had had so many bad experiences. I tried CBT and it made
Mm.
everything worse. And he said,
Mhm.
yeah, for somebody who has complex trauma, that is sometimes really not the right, because he said, what you need is heart. That's what you need. And so
Mhm.
compassion, self-compassion. So I think the first thing that it taught me was to start to have compassion for myself. And then we did start doing EMDR. I'm not sure if you, yeah,
Mhm.
you're, of
Yep.
course. So to just process a little bit of what had happened, and I got to go back and kind of rescue young me, and it helped. It helped a lot.
And he even injected some heart into that, right? He kind of went back and forth between EMDR and then another therapy, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I think it was like a positive type of injection because it was, I mean, that was pretty brilliant, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we use the EMDR platform, which I don't like the eye movement
Mm.
or the hearings. I like the tactile. So I would hold these little buzzers and close my eyes. But instead of processing trauma, he said, there's just too much trauma. We can't. So instead of doing that, we processed very few select memories that were really problematic. And then we went back and reinforced positive states when I felt strong, states
Mhm.
when I was driving across the Bay Bridge in a convertible and not being afraid to get on the highway. And
Mhm.
we kind of went back and reinforced those memories to try
Yeah.
to kind of bring me back to a me, another part of me that was not afraid of so many things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things I found really fascinating was that you had been through so many things, you had been so strong through so many situations, and then it's when everything's kind of calm. It was so outside of maybe your homeostasis. Does that resonate at all? Like,
So much. And I'll even add to that, Donna, you're absolutely right. And this isn't even in the book, but at the time we had just moved here and he had taken a position as chair of a neurosurgery department in Boston. And the department was a mess. And there was a lot going on that was kind of scary at that
Mm.
time. And I had to kind of like rise and help him and get him through that. I won't go into the details, but it was the day when I knew that he was okay, that we had come through it and everything was going to be okay. That's the day I had the panic attack, that really bad one. And
Yep.
looking back now, it's like the minute I let my guard down, like I was you're in fight flight, right? And I was in fight, 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 and then the minute I knew I didn't have to fight anymore, I kind of just crumpled.
Yeah. It's like we're good at the fight or flight piece. Put a person with anxiety in the deep dark and we rise to the occasion every time. It's the not. It's the anticipation of it, right? That's
Exactly. It's like, oh, nothing's wrong. Well,
right.
that feels weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's when we brace. So it's just that scanning for danger, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. How did you find the horse element here? I think there's multiple times that you kind of go with horses and you almost feel like you're at home immediately with them. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I had a friend who rode horses, and she kind of had the opposite life of mine. She had great parents and they were supportive, and she got to follow her dreams. And as a kid, you know, I was jealous. I mean, it pains me
Mhm.
to admit this
Mhm.
now as somebody who
Mhm.
tries not to ever feel that way. Jealousy is just a feeling I'm not really interested in having. But as a kid, it was really hard to see somebody having everything that I wanted and couldn't have, and
Yeah.
that I was kind of had the opposite. And so I just had this like kind of quiet passion for horses. And then when I was a runaway, I remember coming upon field and there were these horses running, and it, in that moment I was just completely like my circumstances, my situation as a teen runaway, dealing with everything I was dealing with, it all fell away and it was just the horses, and it was such a beautiful moment to be there with them. And then so later now I'm having panic attacks and trying to just get out the door to get to therapy, and I drove by a horse stable and pulled over and walked in and was like, "Do you give lessons?" And it was like, who is this? Who am I? I don't even know what's happening. I was just kind of doing these things and observing myself from a distance. And they put me on a horse named Applesauce. And we were probably moving like maybe a hundredth of a mile an hour. Like we were barely moving. Like I was just mostly sitting on top of this animal. But I was like, I ride horses now.
I love
And
that.
but it did definitely light the spark. And there's something about, I guess, because they're flight animals. I was like, oh, I know you. So could relate to that.
And there's also like a persona of being a horse rider too, right? To become dressage or being involved
Dressage.
dressage, yes. To be a part of that, there's a whole thing there that it felt like it kind of led you further and further to face more and more things that you might have been afraid of.
It was kind of an accident. I never thought, oh, I want to do dressage. Dressage really teaches you how to listen to the horse. So the horse is communicating in all these subtle ways, and you're communicating with it. Before I started to learn, I would just look at people on horses and just be like, oh, great, that person's riding a horse. And I had no idea what that actually meant. I thought you just get on, the horse carries you. I had no idea that just by squeezing the reins a little bit, the horse can feel that and respond, or just the slight shift of your seat in the saddle makes all the difference in the world. And
Hmm.
so it was a very intimate relationship, and it taught me a lot about balance. But also the main thing about it is that the horse I fell in love with, Claret, he was very, very spooky, and he had a trauma history of his own. And it didn't matter. I loved him. I just loved him. Like from the moment I met him, I was like, yep, this is the guy. And he was huge and probably not the best choice for a novice rider because I had only been taking lessons for 6 months. But he was my guy. And I would see him so afraid. And in helping him face
Mm-hmm.
his fears, it kind of knocked me out of my own. Teaching him to be brave taught me to be brave, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I think the joy of the story is watching that happen. And one of the things you end up saying, simply, we change by trying to change. We heal by trying to heal. We are strong when we stay faithful to those few words. I know what I need.
Yes, maybe it's just a part of our culture, but that when we are feeling unwell in whatever way we're feeling unwell, we just want the cure. I have an infection, I take antibiotics and it makes it go away, and that's the end of
Yep.
it. And I think like a lot of times that's what we want. We want to just know, okay, what do I have to do to get rid of these panic attacks? They are not cool. they're, they're ruining my life. Just what do I need to do? And then I tried to do the things I was told to do. I tried the CBT, I tried other types of therapy, and when it didn't work, I thought, okay, now what? And so it forced me to reconnect with myself because part of what I think what had happened right before I started having the panic attacks is that we moved. I was in a place where I knew no one. I had no support. And
Mhm.
I was so busy taking care of my then husband, my dogs, this new life that I forgot myself in the process. But I always had a very strong intuition and a strong sense of what I needed. And so that's what I was kind of forced to do is say, okay, none of this is working. And so just getting quiet and pulling over when I want to pull over and going and riding a horse. I mean, I don't know anyone who would have prescribed that for me at that time, but trusting that that was the right thing to do. Although there is equine therapy, so maybe somebody would have prescribed that. I don't know. But in any case, it was that sense of like, this is what I need to do.
Yeah. And you just knew it. It's an interesting idea. Like your body kind of took you out of that car and took you into that building. It was instinctive almost. What's interesting with the horse is you picked an animal that has a similar state, right? And is always sussing things out. It's just fascinating, really, how that worked.
Yeah. Yeah. He's been just an incredible teacher and still is. He's an old man now, so we're all getting old.
We're all getting
But
older.
yeah, yeah.
So one area I do want to hit is your description of the mother relationship that you had. I don't think if I said it here, but I say it a lot that I think a lot of times memoirs are mother stories a bit. We all have these kind of central stories sometimes around our mothers. Can you talk a little bit about the part where you were always looking for the mother you deserved and then the decision maybe post that?
One therapist I went to once said, "You have a contaminated feminine river." I was like, "I beg your pardon." And
Whoa.
yeah, he's throwing a little young at me there. And I was like, okay. He said, basically, my mother had all but ruined me. I'm like, what do you do when the water's polluted? Like, how do you live? I think that for when I was panicking, it was something I very much wanted. I felt so helpless and so alone. And I had always kind of craved the idea of mother,
Hmm.
the mother you see on TV, the Brady Bunch, the whatever I gleaned from my friends. It was just this composite of what mother was. And I just wanted that. I wanted that love. I wanted to be taken care of. I'm the kind of person who's usually taking care of everybody else. And so in that moment, I was just so flat out. I just really needed care. And I was literally looking for a mother. Like I would go to the
Hmm.
grocery store and like look in the produce section. She looks like she could be a good mother. I was so regressed at that time that when I was almost back to my childhood fantasy, when I
Hmm.
would run away, I would always run away hoping that I would find a mom. Like somebody would be like, "Oh, you were just the daughter I've always wanted." And instead, what I found was kind of a lot of men trying to take advantage of teenage girls on the run. But I never lost that hope. And so it kind of came back full strength while I was panicking. But as I started to face the panic and learn the lessons it had to teach me, I started to realize that actually, no, it's too late. And I don't want a mother. I don't want that mother. I don't want a mother to come and make my bed. I didn't want to be infantilized. I didn't want that anymore. What I needed to do was to step up and be not a mother to myself, but a friend, and to be with myself, to take care of myself. And I needed to grieve. I think that that's one of the opportunities that panic brought into my life was, okay, now you're in a safe enough place in your life where you can actually grieve the parents
Mm.
you never had and never will have. And that's okay because there's an empty place there, but you can put other things in those spaces. It doesn't have to be only that.
You did such a great job of talking about that journey. And it's so healthy to, after all of that, decide, I'm good.
Right.
Good. I'm good. I'm going to go forward now because it's hard. I think a lot of people can relate to that desire for that mother that you don't get.
Yeah. And just accepting it. And I think that was, I guess, a moment where I pushed myself into new territory and grew.
I think you're right. I think you grow your way out of it. One more thing I'm going to take from the book, which is one that I totally related to, was you're laughing, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. It's not funny what you said. And then, in spite of myself, I laugh again. It's okay, he reassures. That was a nervous laugh. And just below the laughter, my friend, are the tears.
Buckware. Yeah, that was when I was 15 and in the last of, I guess, 8 institutions that I lived in.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, he was right.
I've never heard that. It's such a great piece of wisdom right there, because I think that's really true.
It is. We have all these different mechanisms to protect ourselves, to cover up pain. And sometimes people who, like in a moment like that, he had actually confided something pretty painful and surprising to me. And I was young and maybe not fully equipped to handle what he told me. So I laughed. But when he said that, obviously I never forgot it because here it is all these years later. It really stuck with me. And more than that, I think what stuck with me is just being in a place where adults were safe and I could have conversations like that. That was the first time in my life that I had any consistency.
Yeah, and it seems like such a gift because that even when you went back to your mom after that, you were able to leave. And then that was kind of it. You were able to go on a path to college and all of that, which was a hard path no matter what. It's a wonderful memoir, folks, if you haven't already told, able to tell that I loved it. But maybe let's take a moment to talk about your other book, which, as I mentioned to Zoe beforehand, I already bought because I was so excited about the memoir. So tell me a little bit about that book.
Well, it's about a young woman who, on her 21st birthday, has decided to end her life. She was abandoned by her mother. Oh no, is every book a mother story?
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. It's not just
Every book I
memoirs.
write.
Hold on.
I don't think the novel I'm writing now is a mother story, thankfully. But yeah, she was abandoned by her mother when she was 6 years old and had been waiting for her return because she said, I'll be back, and never came back. And she ended up living in a small town and being an outcast and just being really dreadfully alone. She was born in a carnival. And so she was exposed to a lot of darkness as a young child. So death to her isn't necessarily terrible, scary thing. And she was like, yeah, I guess I'm going to do that. But somebody else had other plans for her. And so she gets a package delivered to her door, and it is the ashes of her neighbor. The remains of her neighbor, who she barely knew, a kind of curmudgeonly old woman photographer. But there's a letter with the remains, and basically, I knew your mother, and I will tell you what I know if you scatter my ashes at these 9 very specific places across the US and Canada. And so she's
Get the
kind
Canada
of
in there.
faced, yeah. So we know that she goes on a journey because obviously the book would be over on the, the first couple of pages.
Page, yeah, page 5.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Maybe she would go on in some other way. But Essie East throws down the gauntlet and Leah rises to the occasion. And so she goes on this, essentially this treasure hunt, finding out what happened to her mother and finding out kind of who she is in the process.
I can't wait to read it. You got Treasure Hunt and Road Trip, which are like two of my favorites. It's
Oh,
awesome. I can't wait. So, what did I miss? What should I have asked? Or what would you like to share with listeners before we go?
a great question. If I had to just say anything to someone listening, if it's someone who is struggling with panic or anxiety, I just want to say that you are stronger than you know in this moment. And I do believe that we all have within us the strength to move through our fears. I still look at it as an opportunity, and I would not trade my panic attacks for anything.
Well said. Thank you so, so much for writing your story and publishing it, which is not an easy feat, and for being here with me today. I think it will be of great benefit.
Thank you, Donna. I appreciate it. It was great to chat with you.
That's all for today. If you want to learn more about Zoe and her books, those links will be in the show notes. I hope this episode was helpful. If it was, please subscribe, drop a review, or share it with your friends and family. That's the best way to get it in the hands of those who may benefit. And if my daughters, Sienna and Sylvie, are listening, I just want you to know how proud I am of you. And I love you so much. Bye now.